Have scientists finally proven the existence of the soul? That's a big question, one that touches science, philosophy, consciousness, and even your everyday experiences. If you're someone who doesn't believe in souls, God, or anything supernatural, I ask you not to switch off just yet. Religion is based on faith, belief, tradition. That's the story we're told. Something people believed in before we had neuroscience or biology. Once we understood the brain, they said, we'd understand everything about who we are. It's a problem that many leading neuroscientists admit they cannot solve. It's not like finding a missing piece of a puzzle. Fair point. But consider this. Science operates on evidence. And while we can't yet directly detect a soul in a lab, that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Think about gravity. For centuries, we could observe its effects. Apples falling, planets orbiting. But we didn't understand what it was. He studied cardiac arrest patients, people who were clinically dead with no heartbeat or brain activity, and yet a significant number of them reported near-death experiences. Not just fuzzy feelings, but vivid experiences. Seeing their own bodies from above, hearing doctors speak, even describing tools used during resuscitation, all while their brains were completely inactive. The concept of gravity existed long before we had equations to describe it. It's more like realizing we've been using the wrong puzzle altogether. If brain death doesn't end conscious experience, then consciousness, or at least some part of it, may not be entirely brain-based. What scientists found was stunning. In some cases, it was as if two separate consciousnesses now existed in the same body. One hand would button the shirt, the other would unbutton it. One, I could read a word and respond, but the other, I would have no idea what was seen. In the famous double-slit experiment, particles behave differently when they're being observed. It's as if the mere act of consciousness of observation changes reality. It might sound mystical, but is it really more mystical than consciousness itself? In other words, the universe may require a conscious observer to exist in a meaningful way. The you who watched cartoons as a kid, and the you listening to this video right now, your body has changed. Your brain cells have changed. Your memories have faded. People with severe memory loss often still feel like themselves. There's something deeper, something harder to put into words that gives us this sense of I am me. That's what many religious traditions mean by the soul. Not a ghost or a floating spirit, but the real you underneath everything else. But you still feel like you. Why? People who've had near-death experiences report something different. A continuation, not an end. In some cases, blind people have reported seeing during their near-death experience. How can that be? His idea that the self is just an illusion created by brain software raises a major question. Who is being fooled by the illusion? It's a serious hypothesis, one that's gaining more attention, not less, as science advances. But I am asking you to consider this. Is it possible that consciousness, and maybe even who we are, isn't fully explained by physical processes alone? You don't have to believe in angels or heaven to accept that there may be something immaterial about human beings, something that survives brain death, something that gives rise to subjective experience, something that may even interact with the physical world in ways we don't yet fully understand. If there's no real self, then who's experiencing the illusion of a self? And more importantly, let's keep the conversation going. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Whether you believe in a soul or not, your consciousness, your curiosity, is worth exploring. If consciousness is purely brain-based, then is the self just an illusion created by brain wiring? Maybe. But we've been studying the brain for over a century, and the more we learn, the more the mystery deepens. We can manipulate emotions, memories, and behavior, but we still can't find the subject of experience. We can't find you inside the brain. That's not a failure of technology. He says we may need to rethink what it means to be conscious and whether consciousness can exist independently of the brain. That may be a clue that we're looking in the wrong place. But in science, proof rarely works that way. Science builds on evidence, patterns, and repeated observations. And right now, the pattern is clear. The more we learn about consciousness, the more we realize how little we understand it, and how likely it is that something non-physical is involved, or something that must be there for matter to even behave properly. Then maybe, just maybe, consciousness isn't bound to the brain in the way we thought. Or is there something deeper, a you that exists even beyond the parts of your brain? But if the brain is off, flatlined, no EEG activity, how can hallucinations even happen? Consciousness isn't just what happens in the brain, it's what it's like to be someone. That's something physical science struggles to capture. That's like expecting your TV to play a show after you unplug it. But here's the problem. Even today, after mapping huge portions of the brain, measuring neural activity, and building powerful AI systems, scientists still cannot explain one of the most basic facts of your experience: your consciousness. You don't need to believe. Just follow the logic and the evidence. Let's unpack what we actually know, what scientists have been discovering, and why some people, including some very skeptical scientists, are starting to reconsider what we thought we knew about the nature of human consciousness. Let's start with the basics. For most of modern history, science and religion have been seen as opposites. Science is measurable, testable, and based on evidence. We can find correlates, neurons firing, hormones releasing. But no scientist can explain why those chemical reactions should create a subjective experience. But things aren't so simple anymore. See, for centuries, the idea of a soul, an immaterial part of you that makes you you, was dismissed by many scientists as just a poetic metaphor. You know you're conscious. You have thoughts, feelings, emotions. You experience pain, love, boredom, curiosity. But where are those experiences in the brain? This is called the hard problem of consciousness, a term coined by philosopher David Chalmers, and it's not a fringe idea. Now, let's pause here. You might say, okay, we don't understand consciousness fully, but that doesn't mean there's a soul. So when people talk about the soul, they're often describing something like this: an invisible, immaterial part of human beings that is responsible for awareness, free will, and a continued identity. Let's bring in some real-world science. In 2001, Dr. Pim van Lommel, a Dutch cardiologist, published a study in The Lancet, one of the world's most respected medical journals. How can that be explained? If consciousness is just brain activity, then when the brain is off, there should be no experience. But they did experience something. Now again, I'm not saying this proves the soul, but it does force us to question our assumptions. Some skeptics argue that these are just hallucinations, the brain firing randomly during trauma. Let's consider another example: split brain patients. These are people who've had the connection between the two hemispheres of their brain severed, usually to treat epilepsy. So, who is the real person in that body? Even famous atheist philosopher Thomas Nagel once said that reductionist explanations of consciousness, the idea that you can fully explain it by pointing to neurons and chemicals, seem to miss the point. And then there's quantum physics. Yes, that complicated, strange branch of science that even Einstein struggled with. This has led some physicists, like Nobel laureate Eugene Wigner, to suggest that consciousness might be fundamental to the universe, not just a product of it. Let that sink in. If consciousness isn't just a byproduct of matter, but something that can influence matter. Let's shift gears. Think about your identity. There's a strange continuity of self that persists through massive physical change. And no, it's not just memory. Even hardcore materialist thinkers, like Daniel Dennett, have to admit that explaining the self is a challenge. Some atheists argue that we'll eventually explain all of this with neuroscience. And then there's death. If you believe consciousness ends when the body dies, ask yourself, how would you know? Even scientists like Dr. Sam Parnia, who leads resuscitation research at NYU, Admit that the evidence from near-death studies is hard to ignore. Of course, this doesn't mean we've proven the soul the way we prove water boils at 100 degrees. So, what does all this mean? It means the idea of a soul isn't just religious poetry. If you're an atheist or agnostic, I'm not asking you to suddenly believe in a soul. Is it possible that you are more than just neurons and synapses? Science hasn't answered that question yet, but it may be getting closer, and the answer might surprise all of us. Thanks for watching. If you found this video thought-provoking, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Stay thoughtful, stay open, and I'll see you in the next one.